Okay, now we're recording. So anybody that had questions about any of that stuff that's not here with us live to hear it, sorry, I guess you'll have to email me about that. Case study number 1 or the first part of the final exam, which shows up in Module 5. So just a quick reminder though, the first case study is due this coming Sunday, August the 4th. It was assigned, and even though it's due this week, you'll still have to submit it in Module 3. And you should be submitting 2 things to me, your template as well as your PowerPoint presentation. And they should upload just fine. There's a good discussion in the virtual office if you're having trouble with uploading that kind of walks you through it. Then for next week, you have your midterm. I'm sorry, I'm just completely off. I don't even know what day it is. For the midterm, that's due August the 11th. Yes, it is only 1 page. So don't overthink it. Don't try to give me 10. Just give me 1. If you give me 10, you're going to fail. I'm just telling you now. Because what I'm wanting you to do is really synthesize your information and really kind of do that self-reflection. That is, what are the most salient and critical points that I need to know. Then for those of you that like to work ahead or think ahead, I also assign for you next week, you have the second case study. It's part of your final. Okay, so there's a weird number of points assigned to this one, but it's a 2-parter. So, this is pretty lengthy, so that's why I give it to you a couple weeks before the final exam. Week 5 and 6 are completely open, so you should be able to go in and look at those. And I probably won't open up the final module until probably during week 6 sometime. I don't know, I'm still undecided, but I promise I won't kill you on the final. For me, it's more about the case studies. Those are much more, I think, effective learning tools for you guys to demonstrate what you know. I could care less if you can memorize and regurgitate information to me. That I don't think that's helpful, and it's certainly not going to make you a better leader of a PLC. So this is really more about applying what you've learned. Okay? All right, any other questions before we kind of move on for tonight? Okay, awesome. Well, looks like we have about 20. We don't have quite as many people tonight. I know everybody's like, ugh, we're at the middle. We're almost there. Only 2 more class meetings on Zoom after this, and we'll be finished. So let me go ahead and pull up our PowerPoint for tonight, and let me share that with you guys. Maybe. There it goes. Okay. Everybody can see it okay, I assume? Give me a thumbs up if you're good. Okay. Let me go ahead and start this. Come on. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about one of my absolute favorite topics, which is conflict. Not that it ever happens in your PLCs, but I know in my experience that oftentimes I had faculty members or staff members who were a little bit difficult to deal with. Maybe there were some anger issues or some conflict, some people who just like to be passive aggressive, some people who maybe, didn't understand or see the need for the work that we were doing. So the question that I have gotten a million times is, what do you do with difficult people when you're working with them in some kind of a professional learning community or other group? So that's what we're really going to be talking about tonight, is how do you deal with difficult team members? And if you've never had one, you're lucky, but I promise you at some point in your career, you're going to have 1 or 2 or 10 or the whole faculty. You never know. So when does conflict generally happen? Usually it's a reaction to change. A lot of people are very uncomfortable with change. They don't like it. Their first reaction is going to be resistance. And so we have to understand that change process, and we talked about that a little bit before, in terms of why we're having some conflict or why people are being difficult. But it is important that when we're going through change, so not only are we going to talk tonight about conflict, we're also going to talk about change, because we have to understand that change process and how we need to handle that change. And a lot of times that will mitigate or even prevent some of the potential conflict. So what we know about change is this. Every organization tries to institute and goes through change. It's just part and parcel to the work, to the world we live in with technology and these crazy advances. Like I said, change is inevitable. We know from research that more than 70% of the changes that organizations make actually fail. So, we're not very good at this. 70% failure rate is pretty high. So hopefully I can give you at least some tips and tools tonight. They're going to equip you that if you are in that leadership role, whether it's as a teacher leader, a principal, an assistant principal at the central office, that you can do some things ahead of time and as part of your planning and work that will prevent you from becoming part of that 70+% that fail when they try to make changes. Research also tells us that success in an organization is based on two factors. One is on IQ, the other is on EQ. So hopefully we all know what IQ is. IQ is basically just intelligence as well as our ability to do things. So obviously, if we want to have a successful school, we have to have teachers who are smart and trained, intelligent. They know their content, they know good pedagogy, they know how to teach well, they have good communication skills, etc. So that kind of makes up the IQ part of it. The other part of it, EQ, is that emotional intelligence, or the emotional intelligence quotient, EQ. We all come to the table with a level of emotional intelligence. So for some of you who kind of came up through the system a long time ago, you may be aware of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where he talks about that as you progress from level to level, there's certain conditions that have to be met, so that your ultimate goal is to get to what is called self-actualization. I really cannot speak tonight, guys. I am so sorry. Self-actualization. So Maslow's hierarchy starts with that in order for someone to be emotionally secure and emotionally stable, the bottom level says that you have to have your basic needs met. So what do we mean by basic needs? Well, you need to have food, you need to have a place to live, you need to have clothes that you can wear, you have to have a safe, secure environment. And that may seem pretty obvious, but if you don't have those, or if one of those is missing, then it's very difficult, if not impossible, to be emotionally mature and emotionally secure. So think about, maybe some of your students. We have kids who come to school, oftentimes they're hungry, they may be homeless, they may not have their adequate, their basic needs met. And so not only do they struggle with that emotional stability, it also affects their ability to perform in school. But according to Maslow, as we progress through these levels, eventually, we hope as an adult, we are all at self-actualization, where we are emotionally mature and able to handle stressful situations, conflict, whatever the world throws at us. There are authors out there who believe, though, that really we have to think about what they call CQ, which is change intelligence. So, like I said, we're familiar with IQ, we may be somewhat familiar with EQ, but CQ is kind of a new concept. And because we know the pace of change is increasing, we have to understand that change is actually the norm now. It is the landscape for a thriving, growing, prospering organization. If we think in terms of schools, we all know, if you were teaching class and, lessons the same way you did 30 plus years ago, and you haven't made any change, chances are that your students are not going to be successful in the high stakes accountability system in which we live. We have to change in our organizations to be able, like I said, to meet the new and growing demands. So, just talked you through those. We'll keep moving. So what do you do to affect change and therefore minimize conflict and resistance amongst team members? Brain research tells us that for many of us, if not all of us, when we hear the word change, our brain associates it with pain. Change is painful, change is difficult, change is hard. We don't want to do that. So when the brain perceives something as painful, the first thing it wants to do is try to fix the pain. Well, how do you go about fixing the pain? One way is that you avoid the pain. You just avoid it altogether. Another is to resist it or to push back. Some people will fight the change. Some will do it verbally, some will do it behind the scenes, some will do it, I hope not physically, but you never know. I've seen that happen. So what we have to do is not fix the pain or avoid the pain. We have to be able to transcend it or move beyond the pain. So that's why it's critical that we understand what we need to do. So I'm going to give you a scenario. So the need is that we need to change the way sales are processed in a business, okay? So what would we normally do? We'd call a meeting, we'd create a plan, we'd meet with the sales team, and we'd unveil the change in the plan. Putting that in school terms, so we realized that, gosh, we're not doing as well as we need to on our state assessments in mathematics at grade 6. So what do? We call a meeting, we look at the data, we talk about it, we create a plan, then we meet with the whole 6th grade teachers and all the math team and say, here's what we're going to do. How many of you have ever experienced something like that? Raise your hand. How effective was it? On a scale of 1 to 5, show me. 1 being it was awful to 5, it worked, it was great. Okay, yeah, I'm seeing most of you 0s and 1s. It doesn't work, guys. I can sit in my office all day and create the most wonderful plans that look great on paper, but I haven't addressed the fact that we need to make a change and people naturally are going to resist it. So you spring it on the team and you tell everybody, hey, we're going to do this. I'm very excited and I'm sure you will be too. Well, needless to say, that's not how people react. So we have to know that resistance is going to be a natural response, okay? So let's keep moving on here. So I love this quote. It talks about, I think that, so often what looks like resistance in other people is what we as leaders aren't giving them in terms of what they need to get it, to want it, and to be able to do it. If we equip people with those 3 simple things, so let's go over those again. So if we've got change, we need to give them what they need to understand it. We need to give them what they need so that they want the change. And then we also have to be able to give them what they need to be able to do it. When change fails and we have conflict and we have resistance and all of that, it's generally because one or all of those 3 elements were ignored, omitted, or completely missed. When I was an assistant superintendent in Dallas and I was working with my principals, I did a lot of coaching with them. And one of the things that I challenged them to do, and they thought I was crazy until a couple of them actually did it, was I told them that I wanted them on the weekend to go to a used car sales lot and pretend they were going to buy a car. And to really pay attention to what happened the minute they stepped on that lot, the kinds of things and questions they were asked, and how they were steered towards particular kinds of vehicles. Because I said that is, in my opinion, probably the best microcosm of understanding how do you get people to make a change without feeling resistance or conflict. Because good salespeople know how to do this. So using my scenario, go to the used cars lot. So we have to give them what they need. So as soon as you walk on the lot, salespeople are going to size you up. What kind of car did you drive in on? What are you wearing? How old are you? Do you have children? What is it that, just they really quickly read you, okay? So once they kind of know and they look at you and they may ask you a few questions, then they're going to start to really hone in. So I did this recently. I was helping my son-in-law buy a car. And so I went to the car lot with him. And the first thing they tried to do was steer us towards minivans because I have 2 grandchildren and, we need room and all that kind of stuff. Well, they figured out pretty quickly that my son-in-law did not want a minivan. That was not going to be his cup of tea. And this was actually his car. So they kept asking questions and they kept kind of feeling out what it was he wanted. And pretty soon they got it. And so they started moving him more towards SUVs, towards, trucks with back seats and stuff like that. The more that they did this, They help to figure out and make him want something. So they're pointing out the price. They're looking, talking about the horsepower and the engine and all this other kind of things. Then they moved into the finance and, here's what a great deal I can give you, etc. They understood how to get someone to change, buy a car, and not resist it, because these are the key elements and parts. So how do you apply the idea and create change intelligence in the people you work with? The first part is you have to engage the heart. So, that's pretty easy to do. Usually with teachers, we can kind of get to them about, our kids need this to graduate. And if we don't do this, they're going to, fail. And I know in Dallas, we talked a lot about perpetuating generational poverty and, how much a teacher could make a difference to break that cycle. So we did a lot of work around engaging the heart. Secondly, you have to enlighten the head. So what does that mean? You've got to give people information. And then finally, equip the hands. So if I'm going to ask you to make a change, I've got to engage you emotionally. I've got to give you enough facts and information and contextual knowledge to be able to understand maybe why the change is needed and how it's going to benefit us and help us. And then finally, I have to give you the tools and the resources you need to be able to successfully do the change. And like we said earlier, if we miss any one of those components, then we're going to meet with resistance or people ignore it. There may be conflict, etc. So change leadership is really all about letting people know what the challenge is being faced. So as we talked about engaging the heart, what do you have to do? Transparency matters. So one of the things that I did that was really successful was we were not happy with some of our our graduation rate was okay, but we didn't feel like a lot of our students were going on to post-secondary education, whether it was college, the military, trade school, something like that. So I really struggled with, why can't I get the teachers, particularly my senior level teachers, my senior mentors, my senior counselors, to really understand how critical this is? So we felt like, and kind of looking at our data and assessing where we were, was that we had students in our school who were invisible. Now, what I mean by invisible is, and you guys probably know what I'm talking about, everybody knew who our top achievers were. The students who were involved, they were in student council, they were on the football team, our high achievers that got the perfect SAT score, etc. Everybody also knew the bottom part of the senior class. So if you were in the top 10%, you were fine. We knew you. We knew all about you. If you were in the bottom quartile, we knew you too, because we worried about you failing, and we had to do a lot of, reteaching and remediation. You may be a disciplinary issue. You had attendance problems. Who we didn't know was our average student. So we literally took pieces of paper, and we had 450 graduates that year, and we put a student's name on every single paper. Then I had my faculty go around, and they had to pick out students that they knew and write something that they knew about them personally. And teachers tried to cheat and write things like, has a nice smile. And I'm like, no, that's not what we're talking about. When we got done, we gave them, when everybody had written on everybody they knew, it was amazing, the visualization of seeing how many of our students nobody wrote a thing about. 450 graduating seniors, almost 200 staff members, and probably a good 40% of our students, nobody knew anything personal about them. Talk about engaging the heart. Suddenly, we had a lot of people who realized and saw very overtly the need that we had to get people to understand what the challenge was and why we needed to do things differently. So engage the heart is the first step. The second one is called enlighten the head. So understand why a change is needed and how the tools, processes will accomplish and meet the challenge. We're pretty good about telling people maybe why we need to change, but what we don't do is tell them how the tools and processes and things we're doing is going to help us to meet the challenge. So when we were doing this activity and we were trying to come up with some ways to really impact our seniors, yeah, they understood now because I'd gotten their hearts about why we needed the change. But we had to really go through and talk about, here's some of the processes that we can do. Here's some of the tools. Here's, all these different resources we've got that's going to help us to get to know our students individually. And for every one of them to have somebody, an adult in this building that they feel like they can go to who's going to be there for them. That's how you enlighten the head. You can't just tell people why. You've got to show them that if they buy into this change, how things are going to be better on the other side of the change and how our outcomes are going to be positively impacted. Then you have to equip the hands. So we've got to give them tools and the time they need to understand it. I've seen a million times principals roll out this great plan with these great tools, and this has probably happened to you. We've got this great new student management system or this new grade book system. It's going to be so easy. You're going to love it. It's going to make grading 10 times easier. Then we wonder why people are like, I hate this new system. It's hard. It doesn't work. It's blah, blah, blah. Because we failed to give them the time that they needed to really understand it, to play with it, to question it, to, just absolutely spend some time getting dirty with those new tools. Time is critical. Now, it can't go on forever, but you have to build in that time where it's a risk-free environment that people can actually use things. Okay? So we know that when we're talking about change, which leads to conflict, that conflict is hard, but it is also very normal. And conflict can be just anything that, when my desire differs from somebody else's, that can be conflict. Now, it can be minor conflict that we can talk through and resolve. It can become major conflict where there is extensive amounts of conflict and discussion and things like that. But we also have to understand that if we're going to deal with conflict effectively and difficult people effectively, it's generally related to change. And if we take care of those change elements, we may not even get to conflict. But when we do, it's not as simple as it seems. And oftentimes what the conflict may seem like it's about is really not the real issue. That there's something, if you peel back the layers, there's something more to it. So there can be complexity within conflict. So conflict is inevitable, we know that, and oftentimes we feel like we're going from, crisis to crisis, and that, if we're just kind of stuck in this cycle here. So when we're thinking about conflict and handling it, we have to choose and respond according to, sorry, somebody's ending here. I'm trying to figure out who it is. Just one second. Sorry, guys. Okay. So anyway, we have to understand and figure out how we choose to respond, because oftentimes how we choose to respond to conflict determines the outcome. We also have to understand that we are actually in control of conflict. Even if it's somebody else who started it or initiated it, we still can be the person that actually influences the outcome. Okay? So, what do? There are many different ways that we can handle conflict. And quite frankly, whether we do it in a split second or if we take time to think about it, we have to decide how we're going to manage that conflict. So one way you can do it is to avoid it or ignore it. Sometimes that's best. If you have children, you know what that feels like, that sometimes your child's doing something that's just irritating the bejeebers out of you. And sometimes it's better off just to ignore it. It's not worth fighting about. Another way that you can handle conflict is to make an accommodation. Again, let's go back to parenting. I mean, how many times have we said to our child, if you will, clean your room, then you can watch, the new Descendants 3 movie tomorrow night or Friday night that's coming out. You can compromise that if you will clean your room, I'll clean your bathroom for you. We can negotiate. If you clean your bedroom tonight, then you don't have to do your other chores tomorrow. We also have to make sure and understand that we need to handle one issue at a time. So a lot of times you'll have teachers who come in with a litany or a laundry list of complaints. And, you can't really adequately address those. So it's important. What's the most critical? What's the most time the most current or, whatever issue. We also have to time the conflict. It's not appropriate to get into a conflict in the hallway in front of students. So we may have to say, look, we need to talk about this, but now's not the time or the place, and schedule a time to actually have your conflict. Sometimes we need an airing of the issues, or sometimes we just have to manage the conflict. So let me give you an example. So I was at a conference, and one of the sessions that they were doing was on personality typing. And it specifically, they were talking about attachment. So like how we maybe unconsciously hold on to certain things that we don't even realize, whether it's a person, an idea, a thing, etc. I was thinking about this, and I thought, gosh, I always sit when I go to conferences kind of in the same spot. It's like going to church. You have, even though you don't have an assigned seat, you have an assigned seat. Or how students, even if you don't have a seating arrangement, they'll come in and sit in the exact same seat. So I thought, what? Maybe I have this attachment to this is my comfort zone. I'm going to push myself out. So I thought that I'm going to, just do this and see what happens. So I purposely sat in a different location. And this lady comes up to me and she's just insistent. She's like, that's my chair. So instead of really thinking about how I respond, I felt myself getting emotional and kind of angry. And so I became very defensive. I wouldn't say an argument ensued, but we had some discussions about, is this really your chair? I don't think it's really your chair, but I let myself get caught up in what was a really stupid, senseless argument. It's kind of the same argument that, I know I've had with teachers about we needed to move their classroom. They needed to change rooms. Oh my goodness, you thought I was asking them to, I don't know, do something illegal or immoral, and you really, what may seem like not that big a deal, obviously they had a great attachment to it. In fact, one of my greatest failures as a leader, honestly, was I was the new dean of students at a high school. I was pretty young. I was very young, actually. And, we're trying to get ready for school to start, and the principal gives me a list of things he needs me to do, and the first one is to do the assigned parking. Okay, easy enough. You go down alphabetically. Here's space number 1. That goes to Abigail Adams. And then here's space 2. It goes to so-and-so Baker and on down the line. Well, I thought I'd done fine. I got everybody in an assigned spot. Easy peasy. So that day at school when they're passing out all the stuff like the schedule and your room assignment, I pass out, and like I said, I'm brand new. I haven't met 90% or more of the faculty. And, here I am going over this stuff, and I pass out the parking assignments. Oh my gosh. You would have thought there was mutiny. I mean, if they'd had pitchforks and flames, they would have come after me. I did not know that this parking was sacred, that so-and-so always parked here because, and this person had been at the school for the longest, so they got the number 1 spot and all that. And, again, just this huge amount of conflict. And, I wanted to burst into tears in front of all these people. Huge lesson. What do you do in that moment? How do you handle that kind of public conflict or that public mutiny? If I had really thought this through, I would have done some more work before I did something like that, but I didn't. So we know that there's a variety of tools to develop how we handle conflict. So basically, and we're going to kind of look at the work of Kenneth Thomas and Ralph Kilman tonight. They talk about there are 5 styles of handling conflict. Most of us, whether we realize it or not, have a preferred conflict resolution style. I'm an avoider. My husband and I never, ever fight. Never. Literally never fight. Because if he does something that makes me mad, I don't tell him. I just keep it inside. And if I do something that makes him mad, he keeps it inside. Until one day, absolutely nothing may happen, but I'm just in a bad mood, and so I let loose on my litany of grievances. because I don't like conflict very much. I can deal with it, but I don't prefer it. Obviously not the best way to handle conflict. So we have to think about what is our preferred style. But we also need to know that if we are able to really think through something, there are different styles that work particularly well given a unique or different situation. So let's talk about that. So here are the 5 conflict resolution styles. Competing, that's when your goal is to win. Okay, so, we'll talk about more and I'll give you an example. Collaborating, that's when you want a win-win solution. Compromise, we're hoping to find the middle ground. You give a little, I'll give a little. We'll find the middle ground. Avoiding, if you need to delay dealing with the conflict. Or accommodating, where you give into it, you yield to whatever the person wants. You decide that that's not the hill I'm willing to die on today, and let that other person win in a sense. So how do you become effective at doing this? The first thing you have to do is assess the situation. You've got to really get inside somebody's heads, under their skin, and find out what is a need or desire that's not being met. Generally, like I said, people may react to the fact that I moved their parking space, but that really wasn't what it was about. Really, they were upset because they felt like maybe their tenure or their experience wasn't being recognized and honored. Or maybe that, didn't understand that this person had difficulty walking. So, having that spot that was, the furthest from the door was difficult. It really wasn't about a parking spot. We also have to know and understand that we own 100% of how we react and respond to conflict. Now, don't get me wrong. I know there's other people that can push our buttons. I've dealt with many in my career. But we have to understand that the way that we choose to receive the conflict and the way we choose to respond is solely on us. We also have to think about and choose how we want to respond. So instead of that emotional sort of thing that takes over, we have to really think about it and be thoughtful and purposeful in our response. We have to make sure we take action, and we also have to seek a resolution, because we don't want, just like I sometimes do with my husband, we don't want all of the grievances, with a person to build and build and build over time. We want to resolve them and move on, okay? So what do you do first? You assess the situation. Pretty simple. You gather information, you observe. You may want to think about, since we've done, work with colors and their directions, maybe there's someone who is really needs words of affirmation, and just affirming where they are can be really helpful. Then you also have to think about what is the root cause or the root issue behind this. Then we just went through when we talked about how do you do this. You can avoid it, accommodate. We went through all those. But sometimes you have to apologize too. Don't be afraid. A lot of leaders don't like to apologize, especially publicly, because they feel like it undermines their authority. That is so not true. I'm telling you, it absolutely will make you a powerful leader if you make a mistake on it and be willing to admit it. So, you also don't make promises, and you also make sure that everybody understands what are the potential consequences. Even if you acquiesce and let the other person, quote, win, we need to make sure that that person understands you may be able to do what you want this time, but that doesn't mean next time it automatically happens again. You also have to understand perspectives. So, is the conflict with a manager or leader, what is their perspective? What do they know that maybe you don't know? If it's a subordinate, maybe it's something that doesn't even have to do with the work issue. Maybe it's something at home. Is it a colleague, a peer? But always, always, always listen to people first. And so employ the 90-10 rule, which is they do 90% of the talking, you only do 10%. And when you do talk, you're using probing and clarifying questions. Because if you can do that, it'll make a huge difference. Remember that when you're in a position of leadership or authority, or even just, like I said, as a colleague, it's really important that you listen, that you rephrase and paraphrase, and that you don't do why questions. Instead, do what if. So what if you're unable to resolve this issue? How questions. ask them, how can we solve this? Clearly we're having a problem with each other. Pinpoint their ideas and possible solutions. So, I might say to, a student, so you think one way to solve this would be by. And again, I'm communicating that I've listened, that I've internalized what you've said, and I'm going to make sure that we have at least communication open. Then you have to decide how we're going to do this. So you can agree, and whether it's a verbal agreement, written agreement, a handshake, whatever, you can agree to disagree. My stepdaughter and I use that all the time. We agree to disagree about pretty much all the time. So, that's just, and literally that's what we say. I'm like, I hear your perspective and I understand it. It's not the way I feel. So we're going to agree to disagree about this. So what are the parameters and expectations for moving forward? So literally with my stepdaughter, she's very much a millennial kind of person, and very liberal in her thought, and we don't agree a lot of times, but we talk about, what, I want to hear her side. She can probably give me some things I don't know. And she then listens to my side, and if we agree to disagree, we move on. But sometimes, she'll be like, what, I see your point. I never thought about that, or vice versa. So you have to understand. So we know now that when we're going to talk about this issue the next time, here's the way it's going to be done. If you're in a supervisory role and this is a really bad conflict, you may have to do a summary. Here's what the issue was, here's what you said, here's what we've agreed to, here's what I expect moving forward. In some cases, it may have to be directive. It may require an action plan. So it's also hierarchical in nature. So it may start out with just something verbal, which can just be a meeting or a conference. So let's say that in your PLC, you're the leader of your teacher PLC, and you're having real problems with Miss Smith. She just, anytime you guys say anything, whatever. So maybe first you just meet with her and talk to her, but it's still not getting better. So then you may need to involve assistant principal or supervisor or coach. And that may require something in writing where you literally document what they've said. It may be a summary. Here's what you said. Here's what I said. Sometimes it has to become disciplinary, and sometimes it has to become a piece of an employment decision. Now, I will tell you, people who have conflict in their schools and they don't address it, it will spiral out of control. It cannot be completely ignored. Okay, so how do you know which one do you use? Competing mode. So that's when you need to make a quick action, make an unpopular decision, or stand up for a vital issue. So when I was a high school principal, we had this huge event that I just totally forgot the name of. It's awful. Anyway, it had to do with, it was from the Students Against Destructive Decisions. It's a program that they do where you do a drunk driving scenario simulation. Like, it's a huge big deal. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the event. That's terrible. I can see it vividly. I can't remember the name. So anyway, we had been planning this for literally the entire school year. And it was such a big deal. We had literally hundreds and hundreds of parents. We got the fire department, the police department. We got the hospital. Everything's involved. So we simulated a car crash in front of the school where all the students come out and they see literally 2 crashed cars, and it looks like students are injured, and we go through this whole scenario. The police come, the fire department comes, the ambulance. We transported somebody by helicopter. It's a very, very emotional kind of thing. So the last part of the day, after we'd gone through all this, was that we pulled all the students into the auditorium, and we did a program where we had the students who were actually the actors in this simulation talk about how it felt, the parents who had to write their child's obituary. Anyway, it's all done to keep students from making, doing drunk driving and stuff around prom. Anyway, so big, big, big deal. Huge community event. We had the press there, all that. So I make the call over the PA system for the teachers to bring their students to the auditorium. And everybody comes, except I had this one student who comes up to me and she said, Miss So-and-so, who happened to be our choir director, won't let us come. Well, this student was in the program. And she's like, she won't even let me come. And I said, well, she has to. I said, you go back and tell her this has been on the calendar for months and months and months. This is mandatory. She knows that. And, you know, if she has a problem with it, she can come talk to me. Well, the timing was such that I'm literally standing in front of the student body, almost 3,000 students, with a microphone in my hand. And I'm about to introduce and start the program when Miss So-and-so, the choir teacher, comes up to me. And she says to me, she didn't realize the mic's on, and I didn't have the presence of mind at that exact second to mute the mic. She says to me, I'm not coming, and neither are my students, and you can't make me. And I very calmly said, this is not the place or the time to talk about this. We can talk about this following this event, but you will bring your students. I said, if you choose not to come, that's fine. But I have a commitment to your students and the parents that they can be here. She says, I'm not coming. You can't make me. And if you think you can, then I'll just resign right here on the spot. Well, being the smart aleck person that I can be, I said to her, I said, I'm going to accept your resignation, and I'm sure these 3,000 witnesses that just heard you resign will back me up. So literally after the program, I brought her to my office and I made her sign a resignation letter, and she was gone on the spot. We were competing. No way I could let her win in front of 3,000 students. No way. So I had to take quick action. I had to make a very, very unpopular, at least for her, the students were kind of like, yeah, go. But I had to stand up for this issue. It was really important. So that's when you use competing. Normally, I would not handle a situation like that, but she literally let 3,000 students plus 250 teachers hear her resign because she didn't want to follow a directive from her boss. Okay? Collaborating mode. Again, we're going to come together. We're going to integrate a solution. Maybe we need to hear each other's perspectives, but we're going to come to that win-win. In my world, that's the ideal situation, is where you can create a win-win. But as we all know, it's not always possible. Compromising is when you're looking at something with an equal power base, okay? So it's not necessarily supervisor to subordinate. It's really more peer-to-peer, and we're going to come together, and each of us is going to give a little. Sometimes it's better to avoid. I learned a long time ago that when I had a very contentious student or parent issue, or even sometimes a teacher issue, I would listen and take notes and do all this, but I would never make a decision on the spot. Because I needed time to think and research, but I also needed to give them time to calm down. So I avoided it, not forever, but long enough that there was a cooling off period in between, so that we could reduce the tension, that we could, sometimes it would resolve itself. So avoiding is powerful, but just know it can't go on forever. And then accommodating, so sometimes you just need to create that goodwill. You need to keep the peace, or this is like the best teacher ever and you don't know what happened, they just had the worst day. So you're just going to give them some grace for that particular time. Okay? So conflict arises, you can read that, I'm not going to go into it. But if we don't address or manage conflict, remember, it can disrupt our entire group. Okay? So conflict, perception is reality. You may not think it's a big deal, but that other person may think it's a huge deal. And, since we've talked about Maslow tonight, there's one of his quotes. So, conflict, I know, teachers live in the culture of nice, where everybody's going to pretend everything's great because we don't want to be mean to each other because we're basically nice, decent people. But in reality, conflict is really an opportunity for growth, an opportunity for forging ahead. So don't be afraid of it. Know that you've got tools that will help you to do what you need to do and to handle this. Okay, so let me stop my sharing. Okay. Oh, yes, thank you, Anna. It is Shattered Lives. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm looking on the side. Yeah. Okay, so comments, questions, concerns before we close it out for tonight? So yeah, if you're not familiar with the event I was talking about, just type in Shattered Lives. I don't know how often it's done anymore, but it was really, really powerful. One of the coolest things we ever did. Yeah, Jennifer, go ahead. Okay, Jennifer, we can't hear you. Oh no, where'd she go? Jennifer, did you have something? Okay. Sorry, I don't know what's going on with Jennifer's mic. I can't hear her for some reason. Jennifer, you may have to type it in the chat room if you've got a question. Okay. Anything else, guys? Comments, questions, concerns? Okay, well, y'all made it easy. So you get a whole 7 minutes. Oh, wait, got a new message. Let me just look here real quick. Oh. Oh, okay. Hey, Jennifer, I see that. So do you want to type in a question or do you want to just email me something? Okay, so Dawn said that she may want to use this PD. Yeah. Okay, yeah, thanks, Jennifer. I'll watch for your email. Yeah, guys, like I said, you know, honestly, conflict, it's inevitable. I mean, it's going to come to fruition at some point. And I noticed that, like Dawn was talking about working with a group of veteran teachers. One of the things I also found too was that sometimes my biggest resistors were people who had a really great skill set, but they'd always been seen as not very competent. So I could usually pick those people out pretty quickly. And in every instance, I made them the leader of something. And I will tell you, they became my biggest advocates. They became those that could go out and sell it. Because, you know, if Miss So-and-so thought it was a good idea, then everybody's like, well, I guess it is not, you know, it's a pretty good idea. So, yeah. So high skill, low will. Yeah, exactly. I know, like in 2000, I know that's 20 years ago now, but, you know, we were really a cutting edge district in Irving, and we gave every one of our 9th through 12th grade high school students a laptop that they could use at home, they could use at school, whatever. You know, the expectation was we were going to integrate technology into our instruction. And I had a staff, many of them had been there since the mortar was drying on the bricks of the school when it opened in 1968. And we were really struggling with some teachers not wanting to use laptops, or they would even put signs on their door, don't bring your laptop into this classroom. You know, it was just constant battle. And one of my teachers who, like I said, she had been there forever and ever and ever, and in a faculty meeting, somebody kind of starts in on about how bad the laptops were, blah, blah, blah. And I'll never forget, you know, God love Ann Christ. She stood up and she said to everybody, she said, look, if I can do this, there's no excuse for the rest of you. This is what's best for kids. And I was resistant at first, but now I see the benefit. And so, you know, I'm telling you, we all need to get on board. She completely resolved a conflict in literally 20 seconds for the entire thing. Yeah. Yeah, Richard, I like your comment because, yeah, I'm very sarcastic. I spent too many years with high school kids. I am the most sarcastic person in the world. It's terrible. So, yeah. Yeah, good. Lillian, you're right. Awareness is huge. Yeah, and the more you practice, you know, and honestly, too, another quick tip is role play with, like, you know, a friend or your spouse or your significant other or, you know, whatever. And, you know, just kind of walk through it before you actually address it, and then you're going to feel much more comfortable. And the more you do it, it does get pretty easy. Okay. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording, and